This is the infamous Gluttony scene from Seven, a Boschian nightmare trip into a waking hellscape, the likes of which most police thrillers don't even attempt to come close to. However, the atmospheric tension, penetrating darkness, and true horror on display in this scene are exactly what makes Seven so terrifying. Released in 1995, Seven is a neo-noir psychological thriller centering on two detectives, the young and impulsive David Mills, played by Brad Pitt, and the on the brink of retirement, restrained and calculating William Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman. We follow them on what initially appears to be a string of unconnected murders that eventually dovetail into a truly shudder-inducing plot. The scene in question serves as a perfect synecdoche of how Seven stands apart from every other police procedural ever made. Mills and Somerset are called to a crime scene where they're told that a man has been found dead. This is the first victim that they're going to investigate as a team. Mills has just transferred into the department, and Somerset is none too pleased of being assigned this brash partner.
I want you to look, and I want you to listen, okay?
Now, I wasn't standing around guarding the Taco Bell. I've worked homicide 5 years.
Not here.
I understand that.
As they're walking in, Mills gets into an argument with a beat cop whether they've properly investigated the scene and inspected the body to make sure that the victim is in fact dead. Somerset is annoyed by this, as he's become accustomed to the corruption and lack of care the police have sunk to. This immediately shows you who these characters are, how they rank on the internal hierarchy of the police force, and how they relate to each other. It also immediately heightens the tension of the scene because we know the characters we're following, while technically being on the same team, aren't in agreement with one another. Additionally, the brilliance of this scene is that as an audience member, we see Mills asking if the character in question is actually dead.
Wait a minute, no one bothers with vital signs? Did I stutter?
As a setup for the jump scare within this scene. However, after watching the movie again, we realized that this was a setup for the sloth jump scare much later in the film. Andrew Kevin Walker's script is a masterclass in subtle structural elements that work to increase the uneasiness within a scene. As Mills and Somerset enter the crime scene, we instantly realize that this isn't going to be a conventionally executed story. We've all seen crime scene investigations and exposition dump sequences in movies. They're all the same. It's a bunch of people in ill-fitting suits poking around a well-lit room and going, it's definitely homicide. However, director David Fincher and cinematographer Darius Congi don't take the conventional way into the scene. They use the crime scene as a murky interior, a well of blackness. They choose to light the majority of the scene exclusively with Mills and Somerset's flashlights. There could be anything lurking in this apartment. It's already been established that the beat cops don't care enough to thoroughly investigate, and now we're following two men who have a rocky relationship at best into a completely unknown pit garbed in shadow and death. The tension ratchets up almost as soon as Mills and Somerset enter the apartment. The choice to light the scene almost exclusively with their flashlights serves as both a visual metaphor that these two characters are literally illuminating the darkness, and also subconsciously bonds them together for the audience. They're the only thing pushing back against the evil that's surrounding the story. It also helps to subconsciously bond the audience to them and increases the audience's fear of the unknown. Everything about the film is thought out, to the precise detail. Just like the antagonist in the film, the filmmakers needed to make sure that nothing was out of place. The difference between the two protagonists in the story is represented in their costuming. Somerset, a classically methodical character who represents a more mature, thoughtful approach to crime fighting, is wearing a traditional film noir-inspired costume. He has a fedora, trench coat, and a dark suit. He looks more like he'd be at home in the Maltese Falcon or Blast of Silence, while Pitt's Mills looks modern. No hat, just a well-tailored suit and dark overcoat. As they continue into the crime scene, the film unfurls itself and presents a case for why it's unlike anything else. Insert shots of cockroaches, filth, and grime rapidly establish the visual tone of what the rest of the film is going to have. As Mills and Somerset move from room to room, the tension builds. We're all waiting for the payoff of the beat cop altercation that opened the scene. We're waiting for a cheap jump scare because something has got to be in this scene that's unexpected, right? Anything could be lurking in the untamed darkness of this hellhole. Eventually, they discover the body of a balding man tied to a table, dead. He's eaten himself to death. The dingy interior covered in bugs, the atmosphere of the shadows, and this newly discovered cadaver all work in concert to manipulate the viewer into being genuinely uncomfortable. The scene is constructed with prolonged takes that make the audience peer out into the darkness, trying to get ahead of the two investigators. And then it gets even worse. The detectives quickly discover that whoever is killing these humans is doing so in a deeply methodical and planned out way, and they're ritualistically killing them in accordance to the 7 deadly sins: gluttony, pride, greed, lust, envy, wrath, and sloth. This setup sounds like a million different serial killer procedurals, or it could be an episode of Law & Order, or a buddy cop comedy released in the 80s, but it's far from that. Fincher was able to orchestrate every aspect of the filmmaking process to turn the horror up to 11. He uses editing, sound mixing, costume design, and production design to take a well-written script with a somewhat standard premise into a classic. In the Gluttony scene, the sound of pattering rain, the creaking house, and eerie footsteps are all played for horror. Additionally, the soundtrack has a pulsing rising and falling tone that throbs through the scene, giving every minor action the detectives take more and more importance. As they move further and further into the apartment, the soundtrack increases in half-step octaves every few seconds, using a minor scale to increase the atonal tension. It takes a director who is enthralled with the subject matter to make something like this happen. Even though the film was released in 1995, it has a classic feel to it. There's none of the stylistic hallmarks of 90s cinema. There's no fisheyes, bucket hats, or dudes talking about how extreme something is.
Check it out, Extreme Cheddar!
Why is that? Because Fincher was desperate to prove himself as a director, and he knew Seven was his only shot at redemption. After cutting his teeth in the world of music videos, Fincher made the jump into feature films. However, it wasn't a smooth transition. After Alien 3, Fincher knew that if he was lucky enough to get another shot at directing a feature film, it would be his last. Every element of the film is so finely tuned, it rewards repeated viewings. Even the film's opening title sequence, with its creepy, dirty, handmade quality, the credits instantly set the viewer up for what the rest of the film is going to feel like. Designed by Kyle Cooper, they are arguably the most imitated main title sequence ever made. The film grain, the overexposed photos, the inconsistent shutter speeds, and the creepy handwritten credits were revolutionary at the time. The horror on display in the film is its key to success. Fincher's vision to see past the genre tropes and imbue every element of the film with a creeping sense of dread is the reason why it's so terrifying to this day. The film practically vibrates with malice and antipathy toward both its characters and its setting, in the best way possible. The film might just be the most Catholic film production ever made. Every sequence is ballooning with guilt and fear. The Gluttony scene is a perfect example of how Fincher uses every tool in the toolbox to instill a scene with mood, atmosphere, and terrifying ambiance. Every element of the filmmaking process works in concert to push the audience to a tangible sense of unease. Ultimately, what makes Seven so terrifying is a culmination of a million small decisions that Fincher had to make. And each one of those choices was governed by the principle of, how do we make this moment feel even more oppressive? Well, that's all for today's episode. What do you think? What's your favorite David Fincher project that centers on a serial killer? There's a lot of them, so you have some tough choices. And, of course, please subscribe to the Nerdstalgic channel to stay up to date with everything we've got going on.